Gaza, another assumption I'm making, you all know what happened in Gaza, winter of 2008-9. End of December 2008 and part of January 2009, when some people called it the Gaza War, others called it the Gaza attack, others have called it the Gaza operation. It doesn't matter. It does matter. The semantics are very important here, and that's why I cannot even give it a name. But basically, I think you all know what went on in Gaza in the winter of 2008-9. At the end of that operation, at the end of that war, the UN charged Goldstone, Judge Richard Goldstone, with an investigation. And the charge is very important. This was the mandate that he got from the UN on April 3rd, 2009. Quote, to investigate all violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law that might have been committed at any time in the context of the military operations that were conducted in Gaza during the period from 27 December 2008 and 18th January 2009, whether before, during, or after. Any one of you who has any sort of legal sensitivity can see how problematic this is and how much they worked on it. In fact, they had given an earlier charge a month and a half before that Goldstone refused to accept. The earlier charge said to investigate violations perpetrated by Israel. And Goldstone said, no, I will investigate any violations carried out by anyone in that context. A second thing that you might notice, whether before, during, or after. Here are the operations between December 27th and January 18th. And we are to investigate violations whether before, during, or after. We usually talk in human rights, in just war theory, about jus ad bellum and jus in bello, violations or just war. In the war, things that we are permitted to do during war, and things that lead up to war. Goldstone understood this as being an investigation of jus in bello, in other words, violations that went on during the war. But he still had that little expression there, during that period, but whether before, during, or after. Saying before means asking about what it is that brought us to those operations or to that war. These are the two things that I want you to notice in that charge. Goldstone started the investigation. The Palestinians cooperated. The Israelis did not. They did not let him come into Israel to carry out any part of his investigation. He did go to Gaza. He had 2 visits in Gaza, 1 in Amman. Israel did not let him interview soldiers or commanders or public officials. He did interview lots of Israelis who went to Amman in Jordan to give him their evidence. All right, and you can start feeling this atmosphere of distrust. Israelis going to Amman to testify for Goldstone in a report that he is to write on violations, human rights and humanitarian violations, during an Israeli assault. On September 16th, 2009, a year ago, a little more than a year ago, the report was published, was released, and as you can imagine, all hell broke loose in Israel. Before the hell, the results of his report were basically that both sides, Israel and Hamas, had violated international law. He saw these violations as being grave violations that may amount to war crimes. He did not say that they were war crimes. He said that facts show that they might have amounted to war crimes, and that because they may have amounted to war crimes, the two sides, Hamas and Israel, were called upon to conduct investigations, internal investigations, independent but internal investigations and prosecute any war criminals. He said in the results that Israel had not conducted any fitting investigations. They did have investigations, but not fitting investigations, and that the Palestinians did not investigate at all. And there were all sorts of conditions set out, since this was a UN report. Both sides were supposed to investigate within 6 months, start within 3 months. They were basically mandated to include in the investigation data and analysis and conclusions about the blockade, the duty of compensation, the use of certain firearms, of course, and the protection of human rights bodies. All right, so this was a very clean, very official, very judicial-sounding report. Goldstone himself did recommend that if war crimes were proven, the perpetrators be punished in local courts. Israelis in Israeli courts, Palestinians in local Palestinian courts. And he said if the parties refused to investigate, the evidence would be referred to the ICC, the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Officially, formally, Israel did do certain things that I will not go into. Israel did have its own internal military investigations, and because of the ruckus all over the place, Israel did appoint in the end something called the Turkel Committee, which is still working and still investigating, with the supposed aim of getting an independent result on paper, and perhaps even some persecutions. We'll get to that later. My interest is not in the courts. My interest is in the political, educational, and media reactions and responses that, as I said, were let loose the minute that report came out. Media, education, and politics. Now, when I say all hell broke loose, there are things that are to be expected, of course. The first were ad hominem attacks against Goldstone himself, and this, of course, despite his Jewish credentials. He is not only Jewish, he was board member of the Hebrew University, he was chair of a Brandeis Advisory Board on Ethics, Justice, and Public Life. He was president of the World ORT organization. ORT is a Jewish education and training organization all over the world. He served on an international panel of the Commission into Activities of Nazism in Argentina. He investigated, that was investigation of World War II criminals. And forget about personal things. He has a child living in Israel. He had considered himself a Zionist. The minute the report came out, the quotes, a few of them are here on me, quotes of people in high places in Israel against him were absolutely horrendous. Dori Gold, who had been the UN ambassador, Michael Oren, who is ambassador today in Washington, Dershowitz, South Africa's chief rabbi Warren Goldstein, and even Peres, president of Israel, just so you'll see the taste of these things. Warren Goldstein, the rabbi, said that the report is, quote, a political strategy for delegitimizing Israel. Justice Minister in Israel said that it is, quote, phrased in wild, undisciplined, and aggressive language. Peres, who is president of Israel, said, quote, said that Goldstone is, quote, a small man devoid of any sense of justice, a technocrat with no real understanding of jurisprudence. All right, this is a man who we all know of his expertise in jurisprudence. And Peres went on and said that Goldstone was, quote, on a one-sided mission to hurt Israel. Netanyahu said that if the report was voted on in the General Assembly and accepted, then A, Israel will never again take risks for peace, B, this is clearly anti-Semitic. C, this is a well-known bias of the UN against Israel, and always the claims of innocence that we have, quote, the most moral army in the world. But again, as I say, there's nothing surprising about this. This is the regular rhetoric that one always hears. Pundits, by the way, immediately came out and said one of two things: either that the report would be off the table in 2 minutes and nobody would remember it, or else that this report would change the face of Israel and its democracy forever. So it was interesting to see how people were saying diametrically opposite things in their assessment of how strong or how effective this report would be. The NGOs, by the way, the NGOs that I mentioned and many others, all called on the Israeli authorities to just conduct an internal investigation, as Goldstone had charged us with doing. There would be nothing wrong with that. And there was always the regular pragmatic assessment that said that even if the report is all wrong, we should deal with it decently because it might damage us, Israel, that is, diplomatically, on the level of PR. So you got everybody dealing with this, and you got this dealing on a deep level. But the rhetoric was the regular rhetoric. Everyone was blaming, of course, Goldstone, Human Rights Watch, the UN, and as a friend of mine wrote, Eyal Gross wrote in some blog, he said, well, this was a matter of killing the messenger, of course. He had brought us the news, and we had to do something against him. This is all external. What I want to do is take the story one step further and talk about what happened inside Israel, not Israel as against the whole world, the UN, and all of these other externals. There is an organization called Im Tirtzu in Israel. Who's heard of Im Tirtzu? Okay, Stan. All right. Im Tirtzu was a student organization started around 5-6 years ago. The words Im Tirtzu mean, if you so will. And it is part of the old Zionist mantra. Herzl said, Im Tirtzu en zo agada, if you so will, it is not a dream or it is not a myth. And that was the exhortation to Jews, if you so will, Israel is not a dream. They took that part, if you so will. They called themselves Im Tirtzu, and their mission, and this is their official credo on their website, but we have been saying this for 5 years. Their mission says the following, quote, Im Tirtzu is a centrist, extra-parliamentary movement that strives to strengthen the values of Zionism in Israel and to renew and reinstate Zionist discourse, Zionist discourse, thinking, and ideology in order to secure the future of the Jewish people and the State of Israel and strengthen Israeli society and the challenge it faces. Im Tirtzu is committed to leading and advancing a second Zionist revolution on all levels of the Israeli public discourse, intellectual, cultural, media, and political. End of quote. In January 2010, Im Tirtzu put out a report. And they gave the report to Ma'ariv, which is the third biggest newspaper in Israel today, used to be second, now it's down, saying that there are people in Israel who are responsible for Goldstone's report. There are people in Israel who are to be blamed for Goldstone putting out this report against Israel. And those people are members of 16 organizations, NGOs, human rights organizations. Those organizations had sent, as they said, their people to Amman to be interviewed by Goldstone. And by doing that, those organizations, those people had betrayed their own country. The words used were the words treason and betrayal.